Report 1. Invisible Man. Paris had always been our dream destination. My girlfriend Bia and I saved up for almost 2 years for this trip. We wanted to do everything right, you know? No expensive hotels or boring guest houses. We wanted to live like real Parisians, even if just for a week. That's when we started looking on Airbnb. After hours of scrolling and comparing prices, we found what seemed to be the perfect place. It was a studio in an attic, right in the heart of the city. The photos showed a small but super charming apartment, with those typical windows overlooking the rooftops of Paris. The host had great reviews, and the price was within our budget. We didn't think twice before booking. When we finally arrived in Paris, it was a beautiful sunny day. We took a taxi from the airport straight to the Airbnb address. The building was old, one of those typical Parisian ones, with a narrow door and a spiral staircase that seemed endless. We climbed up, dragging our suitcases, out of breath but excited. The apartment was exactly like in the photos. It had a small but well-equipped kitchen, a double bed in one corner, and a little table near the window. The view was breathtaking: slate roofs, chimneys, and in the distance, you could see the tip of the Eiffel Tower. We were so tired from the trip that we barely had time to admire everything. We just dropped our bags, took a quick shower, and crashed into bed. The next day, we woke up late. The jet lag had hit us hard. We got up groggy and went straight to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I noticed something strange. There were some crumbs on the table that I didn't remember seeing the night before. I looked at Bia and asked if she had eaten anything in the middle of the night. She denied it, looking as confused as I was. We stood there for a few minutes, staring at the table, trying to remember if we had touched anything when we arrived. But everything was kind of hazy in our memory. In the end, we shrugged it off and decided it was probably us. We were just too tired to remember. We cleaned the table and got ready to go out. We spent the whole day doing the most cliché tourist things in Paris. We went up the Eiffel Tower, took that boat ride on the Seine, ate crepes on a charming street in Montmartre. When we got back to the apartment at night, we were exhausted but happy. We ordered a pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and watched French movies on TV. We couldn't understand much, but it was fun trying to guess the plot. It was on the second night that things started to get weird. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was Bia. Sometimes she wakes up hungry at night, you know? But when I looked over, she was there, sound asleep. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the noise was coming from the street or the neighboring apartment. But the noise continued. It was like someone was rummaging through drawers, opening and closing cabinets. I lay there, motionless, for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. My heart was beating so hard I was sure Bia could hear it. Finally, I mustered up the courage and got out of bed, slowly. I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The apartment was dark, except for the faint light coming from the window. I walked slowly towards the kitchen, trying not to make any noise. When I got close, the sounds stopped abruptly. I stood there for a moment, hesitant, before entering the kitchen and turning on the light. The scene I found left me confused and scared. The fridge was ajar, and there was food scattered on the counter. A bottle of wine we had bought earlier was half empty, with a dirty glass next to it. My mind was trying to process what I was seeing. Had I sleepwalked? Or had Bia gotten up and I didn't notice? I went back to the bedroom and woke Bia up. She was as surprised as I was when I told her what I had seen. Together, we went back to the kitchen and examined everything. Bia swore it wasn't her, and I knew it wasn't me. We stood there, looking at each other, not knowing what to think. We spent the rest of the night awake, sitting on the bed, talking in hushed voices. We discussed all the possibilities. Could the host have a spare key and be entering the apartment? Or maybe it was a neighbor who knew how to get in. The idea of calling the police crossed our minds, but it seemed like an overreaction. After all, nothing had been stolen. When the sun came up, we were exhausted and confused. We decided we would talk to the host before making any drastic decisions. We sent a message asking if he could come by the apartment to talk. He replied quickly, saying he'd be there in an hour. The host, Pierre, was a guy in his 40s, well-dressed and friendly. When we told him what had happened, he seemed genuinely surprised and concerned. He swore that only he and the housekeeper had keys, and that the housekeeper only came once a week, always when the apartment was empty between guests. Pierre suggested that it might be a problem with the building. He said he would talk to the building manager and see if anyone else had noticed anything strange. He offered to change the lock, but we thought it wasn't necessary. After all, we only had a few more days left in our stay. Pierre gave us his personal number and told us to call if anything happened again. After Pierre left, Bia and I were in a weird mood. We wanted to enjoy our trip, but this whole situation was weighing on us. We decided to go out and spend the day away, try to forget about it for a bit. We went to the Louvre, walked through the Tuileries gardens, did all those touristy things. But in the back of our minds, we couldn't stop thinking about the apartment. When we got back at night, we did a thorough inspection. We looked under the bed, inside the closets, behind the curtains. We didn't find anything suspicious, but still, we couldn't fully relax. We decided to leave a light on in the kitchen and bathroom, just as a precaution. The night passed quietly, with no strange noises. The next morning, we almost managed to convince ourselves that we had imagined everything, almost. Because when I went to get milk from the fridge, I noticed there was less than I remembered. It wasn't a big difference. It could have just been my imagination. But after what had happened, even the smallest thing seemed suspicious. We spent the next few days feeling kind of paranoid. We started taking pictures of the kitchen before going out, and when we came back to see if anything had changed, we put a full glass of water behind the door, like you see in movies, to check if anyone had come in. But nothing happened. No noises, no food disappearing, nothing out of place. It was our second to last night in Paris. We were starting to relax, thinking that maybe it had just been an isolated incident. We went out for dinner at a charming restaurant near Notre Dame, drank wine, laughed a lot. When we got back to the apartment, we were in a good mood, almost forgetting about the incident. That's when we entered and realized something was wrong. The smell was the first thing. It was the smell of food, as if someone had just finished cooking. But we had been out all afternoon and evening. We turned on the lights and went straight to the kitchen. The sink was full of dirty dishes. There were food remnants on the stove. It was as if someone had just had a feast there. Bia started crying, and I was paralyzed. We didn't know what to do. Call the police. Pierre, run away. While we were whispering and discussing, we heard a noise coming from the bathroom. It was like time stopped. We looked at each other, panicked. There was someone in the apartment with us. I grabbed the first object I saw, a corkscrew, and headed towards the bathroom. Bia came behind me, holding her cell phone, ready to call the police. When we got to the bathroom door, it was closed. We could hear the sound of running water. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. With my heart racing, I slowly turned the knob. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing the small bathroom. The shower curtain was closed, and the sound of water was coming from there. Bia squeezed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. I swallowed hard, trying to gather courage for what was to come next. With a quick motion, I pulled the curtain. What we saw left us speechless. There was no one there. The shower water was running freely, but the stall was empty. We stood there, staring at the running shower, trying to understand what was happening. That's when we noticed something strange on the ceiling. There was a small hatch, almost imperceptible, perfectly camouflaged among the wooden beams of the roof. It was slightly misaligned, as if someone had hurriedly exited through there. We didn't need to say anything to each other. We knew we had to get out of there immediately. We ran back to the bedroom, grabbed our suitcases, and threw our things in haphazardly. We didn't care about leaving anything behind. We just wanted to leave as quickly as possible. We ran down the stairs, awkwardly dragging our suitcases. Once on the street, We stopped to catch our breath. It was late at night, and the streets of Paris were almost empty. Bia was shaking, and I wasn't much better. I took out my phone and called Pierre, not caring about the time. He answered sleepily, but became alert as soon as I started talking. Pierre arrived about 20 minutes later, accompanied by 2 police officers. We told them everything that had happened, from the first strange noises to the discovery of the hatch in the bathroom. The officers listened attentively, taking notes. Pierre seemed genuinely shocked and kept repeating that he had no idea there was a secret passage in the apartment. The police did a complete sweep of the apartment. They found evidence that someone was indeed living there and hiding: an old mattress, some dirty clothes, food wrappers. The hatch in the bathroom led to a small attic space where the intruder probably hid when guests were in the apartment. The investigation revealed that the intruder was a homeless man who had discovered a way to enter the building. He had been using the apartment as a hideout for months, only coming out when guests were asleep or away. Pierre was devastated and offered us a full refund, as well as paying for our stay at a hotel for the rest of the trip. That night, we could barely sleep in the hotel. We stayed awake, going over everything that had happened. We wondered how many times the intruder had been in the apartment while we slept, what he could have done. It was a horrible feeling of violation, of no longer being sure about anything. In the following days, we had to go to the police station to give more statements. The police wanted every detail. From the first day, we noticed something strange. It was tiring and stressful, but we knew it was necessary. They showed us photos of suspects, asking if we recognized anyone, but no face seemed familiar. Pierre stayed in touch with us, apologizing repeatedly. He closed the apartment to do a complete renovation and install a security system. He said he would never rent the place again without being absolutely sure it was safe. We understood it wasn't his fault, but it was hard not to feel a certain anger for everything we had been through. Months later, we received an email from the Paris police. They had arrested the man who had been living in the apartment. He was a young guy with mental health issues who had become homeless after losing his job. He wasn't violent, just desperate for a place to stay. In a way, knowing this brought some peace. At least it wasn't someone who wanted to hurt us on purpose. Today, when we tell this story to friends, many don't believe it. It sounds like something from a movie, an urban horror story. And, in a way, it was indeed a horror we lived through. But it also taught us a lot. About trust, about safety, about how life can change in the blink of an eye. We still love Paris, we still travel, we still have adventures. But now, always with a more watchful eye, always a little more cautious. Because we learned in the worst possible way that sometimes, monsters aren't just under the bed. Sometimes, they're hidden right above our heads. Report 2. Watched. I need to share a disturbing experience that happened to me recently during a business trip to Miami. I'm still trying to process everything and, honestly, I don't know if I'll be able to get over this anytime soon. I booked an Airbnb for a 2-week stay, a modern apartment downtown that seemed perfect for my needs. Initially, everything seemed normal. The apartment matched the listing photos exactly, well decorated and equipped with everything I needed. During the first few days, my routine was simple. I'd get back from work, take a shower, order food, and go to sleep. I didn't pay much attention to the details of the place. On the 3rd day, I noticed something strange. I was lying in bed, checking my phone before going to sleep, when I noticed an unusual glow from the digital alarm clock on the bedside table. It was something subtle, almost imperceptible, but it definitely didn't seem normal. At that moment, I didn't give it much importance. I figured it was just a reflection of light or something like that. However, that observation kept nagging at my mind. The next day, during a break at work, I decided to research digital alarm clocks, curiously to see if there were models with different lights or special features. That's when I came across something completely unexpected. Among the search results, several articles and forums popped up discussing common objects used to hide surveillance cameras. Digital alarm clocks were frequently mentioned as one of the most popular disguises. The more I read, the more disturbed I felt. There were countless reports of people discovering hidden cameras in Airbnbs, hotels, and even in clothing fitting rooms. The most alarming thing was that many of these cameras were disguised as everyday objects, including digital alarm clocks, towel hooks, and even artificial plants. I spent the rest of the day at work completely distracted, barely able to concentrate on my tasks. Upon returning to the apartment, I went straight to examine the alarm clock. What I discovered left me in a state of shock. Looking closely, it was possible to distinguish a tiny camera lens, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. The realization that I was being filmed hit me with overwhelming force. If there was a camera there could be others. I began a frantic search through the apartment, meticulously examining every corner and object. My worst fears were confirmed when I found 2 more cameras, one in the bathroom, disguised as a towel hook, and another in the living room, hidden in an artificial plant. The discovery of these cameras left me in a state of absolute horror. My mind began to relive every moment I spent in that apartment, now with the terrible awareness that all my movements had been captured. Every shower, every change of clothes, every intimate moment, everything was recorded without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't think straight. The attendant on the other end of the line seemed not to believe it initially, but when I described in detail what I had found, her voice changed to a tone of genuine concern. She advised me to immediately contact local authorities and assured me they would take immediate action regarding the host. I called the police. The minutes of waiting seemed like an eternity. When the officers arrived, they thoroughly examined the apartment. They confirmed my findings and found something even more disturbing. The cameras were live streaming to a remote server. Someone was actively watching. The police officers started asking questions, many of which I could barely process. They wanted to know how long I had been in the apartment, if I had noticed anything suspicious before, if I knew the owner. I answered as best I could, but my mind was a mess. The idea that someone had been watching me for days left me completely nauseated. While the police conducted their investigation, I received a call from Airbnb. They were horrified by the incident and assured me that the host would be permanently banned from the platform. They offered to cover the costs of a hotel for the remainder of my stay and promised a full refund, plus credits for future bookings. But at that moment, none of that seemed to matter. I spent the night in a nearby hotel, unable to sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every moment of the past few days. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. My personal space, my privacy, my sense of security, all shattered. In the days that followed, I learned that the Airbnb owner had been arrested. The authorities found evidence that he had done this to other guests as well. The idea that there were other victims like me, people who might not even know they were filmed, left me even more disturbed. I tried to focus on work, but it was almost impossible. My colleagues noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't open up to anyone. How do you explain something like this? How do you put into words the feeling of having your privacy completely invaded? The legal case was finally closed a few weeks ago. The Airbnb owner was convicted and will face years in prison. Knowing that he won't be able to do this to anyone else brings some comfort, but it doesn't erase what happened. The recordings were destroyed, but the idea that they existed continues to haunt me occasionally. I decided to share my story here not only as a warning, but also as a form of healing. I know there are others out there who have gone through similar experiences and may feel alone or ashamed to talk about it. I want them to know that they're not alone and that help is available. I also hope that my account can serve as a warning for people to be more vigilant and take precautions when staying in unfamiliar places. Today, I'm in a better place. I've started traveling for work again, although with much more caution. I still have moments of anxiety, but I've learned to manage them. This experience has taught me a lot about resilience and the importance of defending my privacy. If there's anything positive I can take from all this, it's a renewed awareness of how precious our privacy is and how we must always be vigilant to protect it. For those reading this who have gone through something similar, there is hope. With time, support, and proper help, it's possible to overcome even the deepest violations of trust and privacy. Report 3. The Observer. I never thought a simple Airbnb reservation could turn into the worst nightmare of my life. It all started when I decided to rent a room in a shared apartment in New York for a month. I needed to save on accommodation and thought it would be a good opportunity to experience the city like a local. The host, Mark E., seemed super nice in the messages. He responded quickly, gave lots of tips about the area, and even offered to pick me up at the airport. I thought to myself, how lucky. I found the perfect place. When I arrived, Mark was waiting for me with a smile on his face. The apartment was exactly as in the photos, small but well organized, typical of New York. My room was simple, with a single bed, a closet, and a desk. Mark made a point of showing me everything, from where the cutlery was in the kitchen to how to use the washing machine in the building's basement. He seemed really nice and attentive, always asking if I needed anything. In the first few days, Mark really made an effort to make me feel at home. He took me around the neighborhood, showed me where the nearest subway was, the best places to eat. He even introduced me to the neighbors we met in the hallway. I was feeling lucky to have found such a helpful host, but then I started noticing some strange things. Mark always showed up at the same times as me. If I left for work at 8 a.m., there he was in the kitchen making coffee. If I returned at 6 p.m., he was coincidentally arriving home too. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just the rhythm of the city, everyone with similar schedules. But after a few days, it became obvious that it wasn't a coincidence. Once, I changed my departure time without telling anyone. When I opened the apartment door at 6:30 a.m., Mark was there, as if he had been waiting for me. He gave a weird smile and said he had sensed that I was going to leave earlier. I felt a chill in my stomach. How could he know? I started to get suspicious, but tried not to freak out. After all, I still had 3 weeks ahead in that place, but things only got worse. After a week, I started noticing that my things weren't in the same place I left them in the room. Nothing went missing, but it was as if someone had gone through them. My suitcase, which I always left in a specific corner, would appear in another spot. The clothes in the closet were in a different order. My toiletries in the bathroom changed positions. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was distracted and didn't remember where I had left things. Or perhaps it was the cleaner Mark said came once a week. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I started taking photos of my room before leaving, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. The last straw was when Mark started commenting on things I had only talked about in private calls in my room. Once, after a tiring day, I called my mom and vented about how I was feeling lonely in the city. The next day, Mark came all worried asking if I was okay, if I was feeling homesick. I froze. There was no way he could know about this unless he had heard me. Were there hidden cameras or microphones in the room? From that moment on, my life in the apartment turned into a real hell. Every minute I spent inside was psychological torture. I felt constantly watched, as if there were invisible eyes following me around every corner. The apartment that once seemed cozy had now transformed into a claustrophobic prison. I started developing paranoid habits, changing clothes exclusively in the bathroom, with the door not only locked but also blocked with a chair. I spoke on the phone practically in whispers, always under a blanket to muffle the sound. I got to the point of writing important messages in a notepad, afraid that even my thoughts could be heard. The idea of searching for hidden cameras or microphones tormented me. Part of me wanted to turn the room upside down, look in every crack, every outlet, every object that could hide a spying device. But fear paralyzed me. What if I found something? Even worse, what if Mark caught me searching? What would he do if he discovered that I knew? These thoughts kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining where the electronic eyes that I was sure were watching me could be. My daily routine transformed into an elaborate strategy to avoid staying in the apartment as much as possible. I woke up before sunrise, much earlier than I needed to, just to leave without encountering Mark. I spent hours in cafes after work, pretending to be busy with non-existent projects. On weekends, I wandered aimlessly around the city, entering museums that didn't interest me, just to have an excuse not to be home. When it was inevitable to return, I practically ran to my room, locked the door, and pretended to be asleep or very busy, even if it meant lying in the dark in complete silence for hours. Mark's behavior made everything even more disturbing. He continued to act as if nothing was wrong, maintaining that friendly smile and asking questions about my day. But now, every gesture of his sent chills down my spine. The way he tilted his head when listening to me, as if drinking in every word. The gleam in his eyes when he saw me arrive, as if he was hungry for my presence. Even the sound of his footsteps around the apartment made me tremble. I kept imagining if he was standing on the other side of my door, listening to my breathing, waiting for me to lower my guard. It was on one of those sleepless nights that my worst nightmare happened. I woke up suddenly, with that horrible feeling of being watched. You know when you feel there's someone in the room even before opening your eyes? It was exactly that. When I finally forced my eyes open, I almost screamed in terror. There was Mark, standing at my room's door, staring at me. The dim light from the hallway formed a sinister silhouette around him, as if he were some kind of evil apparition. I was paralyzed, barely daring to breathe. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. I quickly closed my eyes, pretending to still be asleep, praying he would leave. The seconds seemed to drag on forever. I could feel his gaze burning my skin. That's when I heard it. A low murmur, almost inaudible. "I'm just protecting you." His voice was different from anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't the usual friendly tone, but something cold, possessive. I heard his footsteps slowly moving away, and the soft click of the door being closed. Even so, I remained motionless for what seemed like hours, afraid he might still be there, watching me. That night, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I lay there, eyes wide open, fixed on the door, expecting at any moment for the doorknob to turn. My mind, a whirlwind of terrifying thoughts, created the worst possible scenarios. Horrible images of Mark entering the room, approaching my bed, touching me, made me tremble uncontrollably. I felt completely vulnerable, like a cornered animal. The hours dragged on in endless agony. I counted the minutes until dawn, desperately planning my escape. I knew I couldn't spend even one more day in that place. I had to leave, and fast, before something worse happened. As soon as the first rays of sunlight began to penetrate through the slats of the blinds, I initiated my escape plan. Every second seemed crucial, and I knew I needed to act with absolute speed and silence. I lay still until I heard Mark's familiar footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced when I heard the bathroom door close and, soon after, the sound of the shower. It was now or never. With hands trembling uncontrollably, I began throwing my things into my suitcase. I didn't have time to fold anything or be organized. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, everything was piled up haphazardly. Every noise I made, no matter how small, made me freeze for a moment, certain that Mark would appear at any instant. The sound of the shower became a countdown in my head, reminding me that my time was running out. I frantically searched every corner of the room, trying not to leave anything behind. I didn't want to give Mark any excuse to contact me later. As I was throwing the last things into my suitcase, my eyes fell on a small brooch he had given me as a welcome gift on the first day. The object, which before seemed like a kind gesture, now caused me repulsion. For a moment, I considered leaving it, but something told me it was better not to give him reasons to keep anything of mine. With the suitcase closed and bag on my shoulders, I approached the bedroom door. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to catch any sound beyond the shower. The apartment seemed quiet, but my mind filled every second of silence with images of Mark waiting for me on the other side. I turned the doorknob slowly, feeling as if the slightest noise could give me away. When I finally opened a crack, I peeked into the empty hallway, half expecting to see Mark there, with that disturbing smile. The path to the front door seemed endless. Each step was calculated to make as little noise as possible. The wooden floor, which I had never noticed was so noisy, seemed to want to betray me with every movement. I passed by the kitchen, where Mark's coffee mug was still on the table, a sinister reminder of his presence. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move and almost dropped my suitcase in fright. It was just the reflection of the curtain swaying with the breeze from the slightly open window. Finally, I reached the front door. My salvation was just a few inches away, but it seemed impossible to reach. My hands were so sweaty and shaky that I could barely hold the keys. I tried once, twice, 3 times to fit the key into the lock, each failed attempt sending waves of panic through my body. What if I couldn't open it? What if Mark finished his shower before I could get out? It was in this moment of desperation that I heard the sound of the shower being turned off. The sudden silence seemed deafening. My brain went into total panic mode. With one last, desperate effort, I finally managed to turn the key. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quietness of the apartment. I didn't wait even one more second. I opened the door and ran out, not even bothering to close it behind me. I went down the stairs 2 at a time, almost falling several times. My suitcase banged against the walls and railings, making a noise that seemed to echo throughout the entire building. I was certain that at any moment I would hear Mark's voice calling me, his footsteps chasing me, but I didn't look back even once. My only thought was to flee, to get as far away as possible from that place. When I finally reached the street, the sunlight and noise of the city hit me like a wave. The contrast with the oppressive silence of the apartment was almost painful. For a moment, I was disoriented, blinking rapidly as my eyes adjusted to the brightness. The sidewalk was full of hurried New Yorkers, all seeming oblivious to my state of panic. I looked frantically up and down the street, half expecting to see Mark emerge from the building's door at any instant. Without thinking twice, I plunged into the crowd, dragging my suitcase awkwardly. I bumped into people, receiving irritated looks and harsh comments, but I didn't care. Every unfamiliar face was a potential danger. Every glance in my direction made me imagine it was Mark following me. I walked for several blocks without direction, just wanting to distance myself as much as possible from that cursed building. After a few minutes of frantic walking, I spotted a free taxi and practically threw myself in front of it. The driver braked sharply, honking and shouting something I didn't understand. I didn't care. I opened the back door and threw myself into the car, yelling, "To any hotel, please. Quick." The cab driver looked at me in the rearview mirror with a mixture of confusion and concern, but shrugged and took off. In the backseat of the taxi, I finally allowed my body to relax a little. The tears I had held back until then began to flow freely down my face. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating in my pocket, and each notification made me shudder. I didn't dare look, afraid of seeing messages from Mark. Instead, with hands still shaking, I opened the Airbnb app and began frantically typing an account of what had happened. The taxi stopped in front of a decent-looking hotel after about 20 minutes. I paid the fare, gave the driver a generous tip, more for the fact that he hadn't asked questions than anything else, and hurried into the lobby. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a professional smile, must have noticed my distressed state. She didn't ask questions when I requested a room for as long as possible, just nodded and processed my credit card quickly. In the elevator, on the way to my room, I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a fatigue that seemed to penetrate to my bones. When I finally entered the room and locked the door, checking 3 times to make sure it was really locked, I let my suitcase drop to the floor and threw myself on the bed. The silence of the hotel room, so different from the oppressive silence of Mark's apartment, seemed almost comforting. I lay there for a long time, just breathing and trying to calm my still racing heart. My cell phone continued to vibrate occasionally, but I ignored it. Instead, I picked up the hotel phone and called the front desk, asking them not to put through any calls to my room and not to inform anyone that I was staying there. The receptionist seemed to understand the seriousness in my tone and assured me that my privacy would be respected. After taking a long hot shower, which seemed to wash away a bit of the terror of the last few weeks, I finally felt safe enough to check my cell phone. As I feared, there were several messages and missed calls from Mark. I didn't dare open any of them. Instead, I blocked his number and deleted all the notifications without reading them. There was also a message from Airbnb support, responding to my initial report. They asked for more details and assured me they were taking my complaint very seriously. With hands still shaking, I replied to the Airbnb email, pouring out all the frightening details of the past few weeks. I described Mark's invasive behavior, the suspicions of espionage, the nighttime incident, and my desperate escape. As I wrote, the memories came back vivid, making my heart race again. But I knew I needed to document everything, not just for my own safety, but to prevent other people from going through the same nightmare. After sending the email, I stared at the cell phone screen, half expecting it to explode with more messages from Mark. But nothing happened. The silence of the hotel room, which before seemed comforting, began to bother me. Every little noise, the air conditioning turning on, footsteps in the hallway, the elevator going up and down, made me start. My mind remained in a state of maximum alert, as if Mark could appear at any moment. I tried turning on the TV to have some background noise, but the program seemed surreal and distant. How could people be living their normal lives while I was here, hidden and terrified? I flipped through the channels without really paying attention, just letting the sound fill the emptiness of the room. At some point, I stopped on a local news channel. The anchor was talking about a privacy invasion case in a nearby neighborhood. My blood ran cold. Could it be possible that... But no, it was just a coincidence. Even so, I quickly turned off the TV. In the middle of the afternoon, I received a call from Airbnb. A gentle and professional voice on the other end of the line assured me that they were taking my complaint very seriously. They had already removed Mark's listing from the platform and were initiating an internal investigation. The representative guaranteed me a full refund and offered to cover the hotel costs for a few days until I could make other arrangements. I was surprised by the speed and seriousness with which they handled the case, and it brought me a small relief. But the relief was short-lived. Soon after hanging up, I began to wonder, what if Mark found out I had reported him? What if he got angry and tried to take revenge? My mind began to create increasingly terrifying scenarios. Rationally, I knew they were paranoid ideas. That night, sleep was a lost battle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face watching me in the darkness. I woke up startled every half hour, certain I had heard the door opening or footsteps in the room. In a moment of desperation, I even considered calling the police. But what would I say? That I was afraid of a man who technically hadn't done anything illegal. That I suspected I had been spied on, but had no concrete proof. I felt powerless and vulnerable, trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The following days in the hotel passed in a blur of anxiety and paranoia. My phone continued to be a source of anxiety. Even though I had blocked Mark's number, I still received calls from unknown numbers that made me tremble. I never answered, of course, but each ring made me imagine that somehow he had gotten a new number to harass me. I got to the point of turning off my cell phone for hours, just to have a moment of peace. But the anxiety of being disconnected ended up being worse. On the third day, I received another contact from Airbnb. They had done a preliminary investigation and discovered that it wasn't the first time Mark had received complaints. Apparently, other female guests had reported strange behaviors, although nothing as extreme as what I experienced. This information brought a confusing mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt validated, knowing I wasn't crazy or exaggerating. On the other, I was furious that Mark had been allowed to continue hosting people after the first complaints. The Airbnb representative informed me that they were cooperating with local authorities and asked if I would like to file a formal complaint with the police. After hours of internal deliberation, I decided to go to the police station. The experience was surreal and exhausting. The officer who attended to me seemed bored at first, as if he was listening to just another trivial complaint. But as I detailed the events, I noticed his expression change. He asked many questions, some of which I didn't have clear answers to. Did you see any cameras? Did he directly threaten you? Do you have any proof of the invasions into your room? Each "no," I answered, made me feel more helpless and foolish. but the officer assured me they would conduct an investigation, especially considering the previous complaints. I left the police station feeling emotionally drained, but with a small sense of accomplishment. I had taken the first step to defend myself, to make my experience real in the eyes of the law. After all that confusion, the police investigated the case. They talked to me, asked Mark some questions, but in the end, nothing happened. They said there wasn't concrete evidence of a crime. I was frustrated, of course, but the officer explained that without physical evidence or witnesses, it was difficult to do anything. Airbnb was more helpful. They removed Mark's listing and gave me a refund. They also offered to pay for some therapy sessions, which I thought was nice of them. At least they took it seriously, even if they couldn't do much more than that. The strangest thing is knowing that Mark is out there, living his life normally. Sometimes I find myself wondering if he did the same thing to other people, or if it was just me. But there's not much I can do about it now. I still use Airbnb from time to time, but I only rent entire places. I obsessively read all the reviews and always make it clear to the host that I'm going to install a camera at the entrance, with permission, of course. Maybe it's an overreaction, but it helps me sleep better. Relato 4. Sarah's brother. I decided to travel to San Francisco for work and booked a room on Airbnb for convenience and affordable price. When I arrived, I noticed the building had a simple facade and a modest environment, without frills or sophisticated decoration. I entered the place without high expectations and was soon surprised by the feeling that something was out of the ordinary. I walked through the silent corridor and noticed that the lighting was dim, which made me feel slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to seriously worry me yet. I climbed the stairs intending to rest before starting my workday. Upon reaching the room, I quickly organized my things, trying to convince myself that the simplicity of the place didn't indicate any problem. Even so, a vague sense of alertness persisted in my mind, without me being able to clearly identify it. I decided to put this discomfort aside and focus on the day's routine. As soon as I set foot in the living room, I was quickly approached by a man who introduced himself as Sarah's brother, the host of the place. He explained that Sarah had been called away for a family emergency, and that he would be taking care of me during my stay. The explanation, although simple, caused me slight uneasiness, as I had never heard of such a situation in Airbnb bookings. He seemed a bit nervous when speaking, but maintained a polite and direct tone. During that brief conversation, it became clear that he didn't know all the details of the house, which made me even more uncomfortable. I tried not to give much importance to the situation, but it left a doubt in my mind. Even so, I accepted his presence and decided to trust that everything would work out. I continued with my work plans, without letting the situation distract my concentration. After leaving my luggage in the room, I sat down to work and organized the day's routine. The feeling of being in a modestly prepared place, but with some details out of place, made me maintain a certain degree of alertness. The lights in the environment were dim and the furniture had a simple appearance, without the care I expected from a listing with good reviews. During work, I heard some noises coming from the hallway in periods of silence that seemed to last longer than normal. The presence of light footsteps and the occasional sound of objects falling made me question whether the place was really safe. Even while focused on the computer, my gaze would sporadically get lost through the window trying to understand the origin of those sounds. The work routine mixed with a growing feeling that something wasn't quite right in that place. I struggled to stay calm, but the uneasiness was hard to ignore. The next morning, I decided to go out for a bit to clear my head and seek a calmer atmosphere outside the building. As I walked through the neighborhood, I was alert to every detail that could explain the strange feeling since the day before. The streets were calm and movement was slow. Even so, the memory of Sarah's supposed brother and his explanation accompanied me. I walked for a few blocks, trying to find a normal pattern in the city's routine, but I couldn't shake off the doubt about the veracity of that account. My thought process was simple. If something was wrong, I should notice. In the middle of this walk, I noticed how the building continued to have the same discreet and lackluster appearance that had bothered me. The contrast between the external scenery and the internal environment of the apartment made me question whether it was really safe to continue the stay. I returned as the concern about what was inside the apartment wouldn't leave me in peace. Back at the apartment, the atmosphere had become more charged. I passed through the corridor and soon spotted the man again, who seemed to always be present, observing from afar. He would appear quickly between corners without me knowing if it was a coincidence or a sign that something wrong was happening. With each encounter, the way he spoke and how he avoided answering simple questions about the house increased my apprehension. I decided to try to return to normalcy and continue with the day's routine, but the discomfort only increased with each minute. While preparing lunch, my mind wouldn't stop recalling small gestures and expressions that, in a simple way, alerted me to a possible lie. I was looking for a logical and simple explanation, but the feeling that something was wrong only solidified as time passed. Even trying to stay calm, the uneasiness proved stronger than I could ignore. Around noon, I received a message on my phone that completely changed the course of the day. The message came from Sarah herself, and in it she stated that she never had a brother, and that it had always been her who took care of her guests. I was surprised and a bit shaken by this statement, as it directly contradicted everything that had been said up to that moment. The simplicity of the message, without any additional explanation, made me rethink the entire situation. The idea that I had been deceived in such an unexpected way increased my internal discomfort. I began to question all previous interactions and wonder about the identity of that man. The feeling was clear. Something that was never explained was there and affected me in a direct and simple way, but without frills. The doubt was turning into concern, and I felt that I needed to act to clarify everything. Not knowing exactly how to proceed, I decided to call the police to report the situation and clarify the facts. While waiting for the officers to arrive, I organized my memories of the events in a direct and straightforward manner. With a calm voice, I reported in a simple way what had happened, focusing only on the essential facts and information that seemed reliable to me. The officers' posture indicated that the situation was not common, and they asked several direct questions to understand the sequence of events. Even with the nervousness I tried to respond clearly and objectively, without leaving room for excessive interpretations. The feeling of having been deceived and living an unusual situation increased with each moment. I was attentive to every detail as they noted down all the information, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. It was clear that, on that day, something unexpected had happened. When the police arrived and began investigating, I could see that the environment was no longer as silent as before. The officers took statements and spoke directly to me about what had happened, seeking to understand what was really going on. With the information provided by the man and the confusion generated by Sarah's message, they confirmed that there was something suspicious about that reservation. The atmosphere, which until then had seemed just strange, transformed into a situation of alert, where every detail counted. Even in a simple way, the experience made it clear that it was no longer possible to ignore what was happening. After the initial investigations, I was instructed to wait while they verified all the data provided. The feeling of insecurity and the sense of having been deceived made the moment heavy, but also necessary. In the end, the situation calmed down a bit, but that simple and unexpected experience would continue to haunt me for a long time. While the police continued to investigate the incident, I sat in a corner of the building's lobby, trying to process everything that was happening. The feeling of insecurity didn't leave me, and even with the officers talking in low voices, it seemed that every word reverberated about how vulnerable I was. I observed every gesture of the police as they noted details and photographed evidence from the scene. The conversation between them was objective and direct, but my heart raced with each mention of the name of the man who had surprised me. I wondered if that day would turn into something I could never forget. Every minute seemed to drag on, and the wait increased the anxiety and discomfort I already felt. Even trying to stay calm, my eyes couldn't look away from every suspicious movement in the building. The uncertainty of the outcome only reinforced the feeling that something darker might still be to come. After a while, I was informed that the investigation was leading to inconsistent information about the man who had posed as the host's brother. The police explained to me that According to the report, he had no official connection to the Sarah who knew about the Airbnb listing. I was surprised, and it made me rethink the trust initially placed in the reservation. They confirmed that an internal investigation would be opened with the platform to seek clarification about the origin of the listing and the resident himself. Even in the face of simple explanations, the atmosphere of distrust did not dissipate. I felt that the truth was wrapped in several layers that might never be fully revealed. Although I had received some consolation from the officers, reality showed me that something had been seriously compromised. The day continued with a feeling of incompleteness, as if the story hadn't come to a definitive closure. After the police left the scene, I received a call from the Airbnb Central. They informed me that they were aware of what had happened, and that an internal security team was reviewing my reservation and the property's evaluations. I was relieved to know that the platform was taking action, but also worried about the possibility of other guests having gone through the same situation. The call was brief, but conveyed the idea that I wasn't alone and that the situation was being taken seriously. Even so, the discomfort persisted and made me question how a listing with such positive reviews could hide such a serious problem. The trust I had placed in the platform was seriously shaken. I found myself reliving every detail of the experience while trying to understand how everything could have gone so wrong so quickly. The feeling of vulnerability continued to accompany me as the day drew to a close. Aware that I couldn't spend another day in that atmosphere, I decided to seek new accommodation for the next moments of my stay. I contacted Airbnb support, and together we found a quick solution for my transfer. The platform's immediate attitude gave me momentary relief, but the discomfort and insecurity remained firm. I did the improvised checkout procedure and packed my few things, feeling that each movement was an attempt to push away those disturbing memories.